Welcome to What the Health? The podcast where anything health is fair game. There's a lot of garbage advice and misinformation out there that can leave you feeling stumped and stuck. Together, let's sift through the sea of BS and find the best ways to get healthy and stay healthy. Join the team as we tackle the trends and bust the myths about health and wellness. Here are your hosts, Dr. Dan Turo, Angela Turo, and Dr. Riley Brown.
Welcome back, everyone. Are we ready to chat?
Yep, sure am.
Right. So we originally were going to call this episode "Why Everybody Doesn't Poop" because of the famous book that's out there. Everybody poops, but we're going to talk about constipation. But really, we've kind of expanded this, and we're going to try and summarize as much as possible. But the gut-brain axis. So you kind of you did a lot of research on this. So I'm going to ask questions. But when we talk about gut-brain axis, I mean we talk about brain and nervous system function all the time, but what do we mean when we're talking about, the gut and the nervous system?
Like how, intimately related they are. It's amazing to see, you have that gut feeling. It's not just a random thing. Like you are connected, from the gut to the brain and vice versa. So, you have the enteric nervous system or the enteric system within the stomach that they call the second brain because of how much control it function or how much function it controls.
Yeah. So so you literally people call it their intuition, right? Gut, I have heard in some of the men's group circles that I'm a part of, gut stands for God's undeniable truth. Gut. So it's like that intuition, that feeling that you get, that like, oh, this doesn't feel right. You can sometimes feel a person's energy or whatnot. And again, I don't want to get so far out there energetically, because there's a strong science behind this stuff. And I remember when I first got introduced to kind of like the interconnectedness of your nervous system, your immune system, and your endocrine system, right? And each one of those systems, and we've talked about this, in different episodes before, but each one of those systems creates a signaling chemical, right? So your brain and your nervous system has neurotransmitters. The endocrine system, which is all your hormones, creates hormones, which is the signaling molecule that goes from the endocrine cell to out to another cell in the body to communicate with it. And your immune system then creates cytokines. And what's interesting is, your immune cells aren't just sending messages to other immune cells. Your immune cells are talking to, cells of any different system of the body. And all three of those systems are very, very interconnected. And what they're finding is so much of the neurotransmitters and the hormones that are, in your brain, your nervous system, are also very well connected and communicated through the gut, right? So
and they talk about like the HPA axis as well, like the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and how like that's all related to the stomach. So you have a lot of people with adrenal dysfunction and stuff like that, and so you just wonder what their gut biome looks like. And looking up to the serotonin, which is big for digestion, sleep, moods, like anxiety and depressions. I didn't realize 90 to 95% of it is made within the stomach. Which is a big concern, knowing what processed foods are, how prevalent they are.
Well, and what do we see very, very commonly? I mean, I would say probably almost 100%. Again, you can never say 100%, but I would say very close to 100% of patients that we see that are on a medication, specifically an SSRI, serotonin reuptake inhibitor, meaning that it's trying to prevent the body from, breaking down and recycling serotonin, which is one of the system, the communication molecules in the brain, neurotransmitters in the brain. So when, you just said it was 90 to 95% of serotonin,
from the stomach.
From the stomach. So I would say very close to 100% of people that are taking an SSRI, serotonin reuptake inhibitor, have digestive challenges, and whether it presents as like significant bloating or constipation, those are the two most common. Then I would argue you have to be very, very careful when you're on those medications, because a lot of people, they want to jump on and they want to impact and change the brain chemistry, and hopefully impact some mental health challenge that they're on. And again, we always say medication can be necessary in some instances, but it has a whole body systematic impact, largely through this this idea of the gut, and that gut nervous system.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's amazing, because they always talk about how important the gut microbiome and stuff is, and I knew the enteric nervous system and the I don't know, weight that it held, but I didn't realize all the other things, like the headaches. When I think of somebody getting a headache, or when I think of somebody brain fog, I typically think of something's going on in the neck.
Yeah.
Which it is definitely a factor, but when you think of all the the vagus nerve, how I think it said 80% of it is signaling from the stomach to the brain. And so I think I even talked to you about how like a couple of studies I think correlated just shy of 50% of Alzheimer's cases had a bad bacteria within the gut travel up the vagus nerve into the brain and start.
Wow.
So it just goes to show the power that the stomach holds, if it's if it's good or if it's bad.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, and if you think about it, like, I always remember in class, especially when you're learning, again, basic biology, basic, physiology and of the digestive system, you don't think about it, but when you take a bite of food and you swallow it, is that food inside or outside your body?
I mean,
it's still outside. It's still outside your body, right?
Yeah.
Because if you take this tube from your mouth, it's one long tube that goes down your esophagus, in your stomach, all throughout your small intestine, large intestine, to the exit, right?
Yeah.
And it's the body's job to break that food down and then bring nutrients from the digestive tract into the bloodstream, which then can be filtered by the liver, and then all that micronutrients can be sent out to different cells and picked up. But that food is still so anything you take into the mouth is still technically on the outside of your body. So there is a barrier between, and that's one of your first lines of defense when you talk about your immune system, the physical barrier from the outside to the inside. And when you're talking about that environment, external to internal environment, it is so important that the body be able to recognize, those things that are coming in. Is it safe to break down and bring into the body, or do we need to be put on red alert that, hey, we could be having an invasion come in? So we talk about stomach bug, it's not necessarily that the bug is inside your body, but, you talk about your enteric nervous system, how important it is to recognize that, hey, an invader, a bacteria or a virus could be, on that food coming in, or, it was passed, through the air and now is trying to get into the body. But neurologically, we're going to recognize that, and we're going to send our immune response to protect us, to make sure that we're bringing in the least amount possible, to have that invader come into the bloodstream, right? Yep. So, and how important it is for that nervous system to be there, to do that, to recognize it, going back to the communication between immune, hormone and nervous system. Yeah. So,
and that's where you could almost jump into the leaky gut syndrome and stuff, where you have that inflammation, and then, what's supposed to be held out and pass through the body without digesting it, now can get through the walls of the intestines. And that's when you get that chronic inflammation and all that stuff just really flares up.
Yeah, because basically you're breaking down, and a lot of times all leaky gut syndrome is that, you have this chronic inflammation right along the lining. So we just said it's like there should be a tight seal, a tight separation, but if it's chronically inflamed, what happens is it starts to break down. Just like, if you have a crack in your foundation, and over time it's not fixed, you got more and more water that can, kind of sneak through that. Same idea with your gut. If you have like this chronic weakness there and inflammation, now you're allowing these like larger proteins that haven't been broken down into the bloodstream, and now the immune system becomes hyper aware of what's going on in in that nervous system, so or in that awareness. I thought I turned this off.
We can probably
we can both those, we can cut that out.
Not allowed to go smooth.
All right, back to where we were. So understanding that leaky gut and the importance of that, and that's why we don't talk about that too much directly in the office. But if you're trying to heal that leaky gut, there's a lot of functional medicine specialists that'll work on a detoxification program. We talk about fasting, and the importance of that. Really like going once a quarter, in your calendar year, doing a 3 to 5 day water fast. I mean, if you did that, that would change so much in your health and your well-being. If you have any digestive challenges, if you have any brain fog, because that, again, you mentioned the brain fog. Like, what happens if you got a leaky gut and now things are getting undigested into that bloodstream, and now your immune system becomes hyper aware, hyperactive of what's going on? Then you kind of create this autoimmune inflammation, this autoimmune response. And so now you've got brain fog, you've got indigestion, bloatedness, constipation, and just the list goes on and on and on.
I mean, it's amazing to see the list that you could name for what the stomach can affect. Like you said, brain function, immune responses, hyper allergy, like all, for me personally, it's the allergies, that I think affect me the most. Yeah. I mean, heart regulation, heart rate variability, all the kind of stuff. You look at all these different bodily, organs and how they're affected just from one system. Yeah. Which again goes back to, hammers home the topic we always talk about, right? Is that everything's so interconnected. So it's not that we're, just a heart or a brain or a stomach. It's like it's all interconnected, and if you don't have a heart pumping blood to the brain is useless. If you don't have, although I did hear it at one point in time where someone basically said, you are a brain and nervous system, with a body to be able to support that nervous system, right? And but again, because without, we live our life through our nervous system, but that's the piece that coordinates through everything else. It's the master, coordinator of the body. Yeah. So, again, without it, nothing else is going to communicate properly. But again, if you don't have the good barrier and the communication with that barrier system, then everything else can break down. So did you come across anything that can lead to like the breakdown or the dysfunction of this, gut-brain axis, the enteric nervous system? Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is the gut microbiome. Okay. So, you have good bacteria and you have bad bacteria. Feeding the bad bacteria with sugars and seed oils and a lot of processed stuff. If it's able to live on the shelf for a long time or, in the fridge for a long time, it's probably not good for you. Yeah. And I think that will kind of feed the bad bacteria within the stomach. The counter of that is, I saw a lot of magnesium stuff, which is really beneficial. Obviously fermented foods, and then probiotics and stuff like that. I think those are the biggest things, but it's really just how well what you're ingesting. If you have harmful chemicals, whether it be like tobacco, smoking, drinking, all the fun stuff, or like processed foods, sugars, all that kind of stuff tends to be the most harmful factor. And again, I think it's important to say, like, it doesn't mean you can never have those things. Like, there's some people that live in such an idealistic model that it's like, I'm never going to touch any of that stuff. But what it comes down to is the discipline, right? Like, it's okay to have, a sugary snack once in a while. It's okay to,
have a, glass of, wine once in a while. Okay to have a cigar once in a while. Like, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm not gonna, we're not gonna like judge you so hard but it's in when the discipline breaks down and the slight indulgence becomes a constant irritant, right? And that starts to become an addiction. Now you're, one sugary snack 1 or 2 times a week becomes, 2 or 3 sugary snacks a day.
Yep.
Or you've got the guys who like to do the chewing tobacco, and it's just first thing they wake up in the morning before they hit the job site, boom, it pops in, and now it's in there for 8 hours, and they're changing it out every couple hours. It's like that's a chronic problem. The people who are drinking 2+ beverages a night for 7 days a week, like, you're never giving your system a chance to rest, and that's when the weaknesses start to break down, and you start to get holes through that barrier, and you're feeding that negative, the negative microbiome, the negative bacteria that are will cause a constant problem.
And that's the indulge. What you're risking with those indulging in that and stuff. And when you, like you said, when you don't let the body rest, that's when you run into the issue, because if the body's not made to be pure, in terms of the food that you're eating. So, if you're, very strict, never eat anything bad, good for you. But like, if you do, it's just got to be few and far between, because the body has to flush it out. And like you said, if you keep that process going, the body just kind of downslides from there.
So then did you look at anything in terms of what you can do? Well, we talked about supporting that, the microbiome with the good probiotic. Well, again, you also talked about like taking good probiotics, but like avoiding the sugars, the seed oils. Any examples of seed oils that you could tell people?
I mean, it's just the typical like canola oil, vegetable oil. I want to say
you just put it in the Google machine, right? And it'll give you a list of
oils. Like avocado oil is good, coconut oil is good, organic olive oil, kind of like that. Those, I forget, are those the ones with the high?
Yeah. So the high heat index. It basically means that the higher the boiling point, the higher the temperature has to get before it starts like breaking down and turning into a hydrogenated fat, right? Where you're adding hydrogens, and then you change the shape of the molecule. So, right, you think of like a rancid oil. If if you have an oil that's just been sitting on the shelf for a long time and not properly preserved, it goes rancid. So when you take an oil through a high heat index, you basically increase the probability that it's going to go rancid, that it's going to change its chemical shape, and it's not going to be positive for your cellular mechanism and communication. The higher temperature oils, like you just mentioned, the coconut, the avocado, those types of oils are okay to be cooked with at a higher temperature, whereas a lot of the the canola oils, as one example, they break down at a much lower temperature. And so when you're frying at a high heat, so again, think of your fried foods, like, a lot of the restaurants, it's like, oh, we're just going to fry it up with seed oil. They used to, do everything with beef tallow. And again, it's an animal fat. It has a very high temperature index. And, people always used to say like, oh, but look at how fatty it is. And, but if you take coconut oil and put it on your counter, and it's under 70 degrees, the ambient temperature, that coconut oil is solid. But then as soon as it heats up above 75 degrees, which again, your internal body temperature should be at 93, those oils that are quote unquote like fatty and look clogging, and animal fat is just like that. As soon as you heat it up a little bit, boom, it melts down to an oil. So you have a higher ability with those oils to they have a higher preservation level to maintain their healthy effects at a higher temperature. So that's really what it comes down to, is that temperature. So just go put it in the search machine, seed oils, avoid it. Although I did have a recent conversation, I think you were in on that consult with the patient where he said the hardest thing, he was eliminating sugar, trying to do all the healthy things because he had some pretty significant chronic health challenges that he's been able to work through by diet modification, lifestyle modification. But the hardest thing that he was having to embark upon was the elimination of those seed oils, because they are in everything. But that has been more of a hot topic more recently, and I think more and more people, and I think the food industry is going to start going that direction, but people are trying to avoid those because they're not just disruptors to the enteric nervous system, but they're disruptors to our hormonal and cellular communication and regulatory systems. So
like the only thing we didn't talk about was antibiotics.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. Obviously.
What'd you come across with that?
Well, I mean, it's just once again, it doesn't. Antibiotics are meant to kill biotics, whether it be good or bad. So that's where you run into an issue. And I mean, antibiotics are needed on certain things. Like, you won't argue that, but you have some of the prescribers just throwing people on them, like, hey, you might have this. Yeah. Let's see if antibiotics will help, rather than doing the test. And so, I don't know. I mean, it's a blessing and a curse, because I guess you're killing everything, but you got to start correctly, or take the pre and probiotics while you're taking those antibiotics, so that way you're hopefully killing more of the bad than you are the good.
It's kind of like chemotherapy, right? Like, I mean, chemotherapy literally wipes out, doesn't care whether it's a healthy cell or a sick cell, chemotherapy. Now, they've gotten better over the decades of trying to make medicines that are more targeted towards cancer cells, but a lot of chemotherapy, especially back in the day, it was like, here, we're just going to wipe out everything and pray that, the sick cells die before, the healthy cells do. And, and then we can allow you enough time to proliferate and get healthy again. Again, crapshoot model. But, when you're talking about antibiotic, it's a very similar idea, right? We're just going to wipe out the spectrum of, bacteria in your body, whether it's good or bad. Again, we all have bacteria over our skin, inside our gut, inside our mouth. So you take that antibiotic, and it's a broad spectrum antibiotic, it's killing the good and the bad.
Yeah.
And so, are there ways that, other than taking a probiotic, are there other ways that people can support a healthy microbiome in their gut?
Vegetables tend to be pretty good in terms of that. Obviously, an anti-inflammatory type diet will help. Like I said earlier, fermented foods. I think what else I came across. I think it was a lot of like greens and vegetables to help kind of get that gut bacteria in the right direction. But pre and probiotics seem to be the most common. I don't know if that was more so pushy or if it was truth, but that seemed to be the most encouraged.
Yeah, and then in addition to like giving the physical sustenance, then we always go back from a chiropractic perspective and talking about making sure the neurological tone and communication is good, right? Because if you are in a fight or flight state, and we've talked about this before, right? Like, we're wired to either be in a sympathetic or a parasympathetic state. And again, they wax and wane, right? Like, so when the sympathetics, which is your fight or flight, right? That's the, you're eating down by the water, and you're it's a word I'm looking for, but basically a caveman, and you're down by the water hole, and saber-toothed tiger jumps out, and like, boom, you're in a fight or flight, because you either have to kill that saber-toothed tiger or figure out how to run to save your life. Well, when that sympathetic fight or flight system is high, we know neurologically, your immune system is shutting down. Your digestive system is shutting down. Again, a lot of times when you're so fearful, you're literally, vomiting, diarrhea, because your body can't hold that food, because it doesn't want to waste energy on the immune system and the digestive system, because those are slow building, slow communication systems when you're trying to save your life. So everything is high, like go, shunt all the blood to your muscles to fight or flee. So that's your sympathetic nervous system. Well, on the other flip side of that, if you get away, which hopefully you do, now you have to be able to, if you were in a fight and you've got scratches, you've got to be able to heal that.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to eat your, healthy food so that you can heal and get your body strong again. Well, that's your rest and digest system. That's your parasympathetic system. Both systems are necessary, but unfortunately, we don't have the saber-toothed tiger to deal with, nowadays, but, now we have, mortgage payments, student loan payments, you've got teens on social media, bullying one another. What do I wear? What's my neighbor going to think about this? You have all of these mental, emotional stressors that become a saber-toothed tiger, like in the background, is going to get you. And so we're constantly in this sympathetic overdrive. And if you're in sympathetic overdrive, what happens then? Enteric nervous system shuts down. Okay, not completely, but again, it's going to significantly be impacted because blood is being shunted away, literally, whenever you're in that sympathetic overdrive. So, as chiropractors, we want to focus on how can we get you out of that sympathetic overdrive and start to balance out the parasympathetic with the sympathetic. And that's what we help to do, right? With the, when we look at that infrared thermal scan, we want to see, is your sympathetic super high, and what can we do? You mentioned heart rate variability. What can we do to help bring, the breathing down, the heart rate variability stronger, that infrared nervous system? What can we do? And there are specific adjustments that we can do that actually stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system to ramp up, and thus in turn bringing down that sympathetic nervous system. One of the most common we do is the Logan basic adjustment, right? And you've done that on infants or moms or again, anyone who has a hyperactive sympathetic nervous system, which again is probably 90+% of people that come in. But the parasympathetic nervous system is primarily driven through the very upper cervical region and then the very lower sacral region of the spine. And again, it's not just the spine, but it's like that location of the spine where the nerve roots are coming off the spinal cord that are impacting those levels of the nervous system. So there's a specific adjustment that we do to help, ramp up that parasympathetic nervous system, and thus in turn bring down that sympathetic fight or flight overdrive. So yeah, I mean that's one way that we help that enteric nervous system to communicate better. And again, when those systems are all regulating and communicating properly, then the body is able to better handle the nutrients, better handle the microbiome, take care of those those dangers, be more aware of those dangers with leaky gut. Because it's communicating better. So, did you have anything else to add with gut brain? I know we could talk about this
not really. I mean, everything was covered. It's such a broad topic, and there's so many, like I said, different networks that are in it that you could dive into. But trying to keep it as as broad as possible.
Well, yeah, and I think it's important because you mentioned Alzheimer's, and again, you mentioned leaky gut, and it's like we went down so many different paths that again, each one of those paths, could open up another hour and a half conversation. But I think it's important to understand that, you do have, neurological communication going on in the stomach that is also talking to the brain and the rest of the body, and being able to support that through the healthy, lifestyle factors that we already discussed. But I find that very interesting about, Alzheimer's and, how some of these other, chronic diseases, can, have connections, right, to this breakdown. And again, every time they do a different study, they're finding more connections. Well, it could be related to this because they don't really know, right? Like, even diabetes now Alzheimer's being called type 3 diabetes, right? Because it's like this imbalance of sugar regulation at the brain level. So you're getting this neurological disease because your brain is, basically starting to lose its processing ability from sugar. And so, and again, it's because of an over inundation of sugar over, not just months or years, but like decades. And so, a lot of the chronic disease that we're seeing nowadays, it's not just age related, it's chronic toxicity
Yeah.
that we're seeing, and that, this chronic, nerve system dysregulation, that we talked about. So there is a solution, right? There, you don't have to, you don't have to just be worried like, oh, my parents had this, and so now I'm going to get this, right? How many times do we get people to come in and it's like, oh, well, I don't want to be where my parents are at, right?
Yeah, I see a lot of them, and I think they're some of the better patients to work with. And I mean, obviously all of them are great, but they see what could happen if they walk down that path.
Yeah.
And so that they already understand that there is a way to correct it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So again, it's not doom and gloom, right? You're just trying to bring to light, different things that you can do. And I think with AI and, people being more interactive, with the information that's out there, it's helping people develop better patterns for health, younger and earlier now, more than ever before. And they're not just taking their doctor's word for it, right? Yeah. Which unfortunately, a lot of times, the doctors are, they just learn what they learn in medical school. And unfortunately, a lot of medical schools have been bought by big pharma money that, this is what we're going to teach and this is what now. And now that trickles down into your health. And so, what we always say is you have to become your single greatest health advocate. And, you have the tools to be able to do that. So it's like, get the information. And if you have questions about it, then talk to a professional, or someone who has lived experience, in a healthy realm. Right. So yes, not all doom and gloom. A lot of things that are chronic and chronically age related, like, oh, I'm just getting older, is not necessarily the case. And so you can take care of this stuff, with some simple changes in your health and well-being. So anything else to add, Doc?
No, I think it was pretty good.
Awesome. We'll see you all at the next one. Yeah. Take care of your gut-brain axis.
You've been listening to another episode of What the Health? The podcast where anything health is fair game, with your hosts, Dr. Dan, Angela, and Dr. Riley. Brought to you by Turo Family Chiropractic. If you'd like to learn more about some of the resources mentioned on this show, or you have questions about something that was discussed, please reach out through our website at www.turofamilychiropractic.com. Remember to like and subscribe to What the Health Podcast to catch all the latest episodes and replay your favorites. Thank you for listening, and remember, we're always here to help when you find yourself saying, "What the hell?"